At the end of this episode, Peggy Carter uses the Tesseract, which contains the Space Stone, to time travel forward in time 70 years, which might seem a little weird because the Space Stone doesn't actually have the ability to do that. The Space Stone, as the name would imply, allows you to travel through space. It does not allow you to travel through time or control it in any way. There is another stone that does that exact thing, and conveniently it's called the Time Stone. How do they mess this up? How do they mess this up? I just can't believe this. How do the Disney writers not understand how the Infinity Stones work? How are the writers so unbelievably inept they don't get even simple things about the story they're writing? Clearly, there wasn't any kind of test for basic knowledge about the MCU or the comics in any way during the hiring process, but I'm kind of thinking there probably should have been. But don't worry, it gets worse. Marvel's What If is bad. Honestly, I did have some hope for this series, but after watching that first episode, no, that's completely gone. Let me give you a quick recap on what the concept of this series is. Marvel's What If was originally a very cool idea that allowed writers to tell interesting stories that normally wouldn't have been possible, alternate versions of the stories that had already been told, and introduce significant changes from what had originally happened without creating any confusion or problems for the main comic continuity. It was a good idea, and there were some cool stories that came from it, and because Marvel is a multiverse with infinite possibilities, all of those other What If storylines are considered canon. They just take place in a universe that's different from the primary one. However, if a particular story or character in an alternate universe became popular enough, then it was possible that it could cross over with the main Marvel universe of Earth 616. And in case you're wondering, the MCU is considered Earth 199999. So the original purpose of the What If comics was to tell interesting stories that might otherwise not be told. Unfortunately, with Disney and Marvel in the state they are in current year, that is no longer the case, as Disney has decided to use these what-if stories and the multiverse in order to push their woke garbage. Oh, and there's plenty of shitty writing too, but we'll get to that later. From what I've seen, the only characters that are being removed and replaced with alternate versions are going to be the white guys. Disney has no problem whatsoever replacing Peter Quill with T'Challa, but don't think for even a second they would put a white guy in that Black Panther costume.
Well, I definitely am not white.
Despite the series being animated, Disney has already confirmed that some of the characters from the What If animated series will be crossing over into the live-action shows and movies. Captain Carter has already been specifically mentioned that she will appear in the live-action content. Now, I like Peggy Carter. I think she's probably the best female character in all of the MCU, and I would have liked to see more of her in the live-action content, but not after all the awful changes that they made to her in this series.
You've changed, and not entirely for the better, Bilbo Baggins.
Let's take a look at the episode. It starts right when Steve Rogers is about to get a dose of the super serum. The change that happens is Peggy Carter decides to stay in the room instead of leaving it. The enemy agent detonates his explosive earlier than in the main universe, but Peggy manages to kill him. However, Steve Rogers is shot in the process and unable to go through with the procedure. During the fight, some of the equipment is damaged, and Howard Stark says that if they don't use it now, they will lose the entire project, which doesn't make any sense at all, because the big part of the super serum procedure was the serum itself. That was the difficult part and the one thing that couldn't be replicated. The machinery that Howard Stark built could very easily be recreated. He's the one that made it, he has all the blueprints, and he certainly has the money to do it. The idea that the entire project would go to waste because the machinery was broken simply doesn't make any sense at all. But the writers wanted Peggy to get the serum, and this stupidity was the best that they could come up with.
Congratulations, you're a failure.
But don't worry, it gets worse, because after Peggy gets out of the machine, she's turned into this.
That ain't no woman, it's a man.
Unfortunately, this has become a pretty common thing with current year woke Hollywood. They simply will not allow any strong female characters to retain their femininity. So rather than having the serum accentuate Peggy's features like it should have, it just ends up turning her into a guy with long hair. And it looks fucking ridiculous.
I am the strongest woman this state has ever seen.
But don't worry, it gets worse. In addition to the shitty writing, they also made sure to cram in as much blatant woke man-hating garbage as possible. It's all throughout the entire episode. This is just the first instance of it. So in the Captain America movie, the officers in charge were upset because they expected to have an entire army of super soldiers. Instead, they just had the one with Steve Rogers, and they didn't really know what to do with him. In the show, it's kind of the same thing, but they also added this nonsense.
Instead, I get a girl.
It's not just stupid, it's bottom-of-the-barrel lazy. The ironic thing is Colonel Flynn is completely accurate in some of the things he says during this conversation. He states that women are not soldiers on the front line, which is objectively true, not only during the time period that the show is taking place, but even today, there are not any women in the infantry because they don't have the physical strength and endurance required to do the job. Women can fulfill a lot of different other roles in the military, but infantry is not one of them. Disney wants to portray Colonel Flynn as bad for saying this, even though what he's saying is objectively true.
You can't handle the truth.
Something else he says is that Peggy is lucky to be in the room and not brought up on charges. He says this because she took it upon herself to jump into the chamber and use the super serum, something she was obviously not qualified or authorized to do. And again, Colonel Flynn is correct, but the show is going to try to do this stupid thing later on in order to show that white man bad. We get a couple of scenes that recreate what we saw in the movie with Red Skull stealing the Tesseract, and somehow Peggy and Howard find out about it and they want to go after it because they believe it's too powerful to be in the hands of Hydra. However, Colonel Flynn doesn't quite understand it and doesn't think it's worth the risk to send men to go after what he essentially believes is something that's not super important. And this is an entirely reasonable position for him to take because the Tesseract essentially functions like magic. And up until this point in the timeline, none of the magic, none of that supernatural stuff has ever really been brought to the attention of the overwhelming majority of people on Earth. So Colonel Flynn, being told that this device is basically magic, of course he's going to brush it off as nonsense because that is what any reasonable person would do.
Excellent point.
So once again, the show tries and fails to make Colonel Flynn look stupid for the absurd reason that he doesn't believe in magic. During the argument, Colonel Flynn calls both of them crazy and tells Peggy once again that she's lucky to be in the room, and remember this for later because it gets really dumb. Howard Stark then reveals the costume that was created for Peggy and also gives her the shield. She then takes it upon herself to go after the Tesseract, and she single-handedly defeats an entire Hydra convoy, recovering the Tesseract while capturing Zola at the same time. Remember, one of the things that Disney has been doing with the MCU is creating female versions of characters who turn out to be stronger, faster, smarter, and generally better in every conceivable way than their male counterparts. Just recently, we saw this with Loki, where the female version ran circles around him and made him look like an utter buffoon all the time.
Obi, when it fits a woman.
Because man bad, woman good. And now they're doing the same thing with Peggy Carter versus Steve Rogers, where in the movie, Steve struggled to recover the Tesseract. Peggy was able to do it by herself with no effort whatsoever. And again, don't forget that this version of Captain Carter with the super serum will be showing up in the live-action MCU, and I'm certain she will be in every conceivable way a better super soldier than Steve Rogers was. She brings the Tesseract to Colonel Flynn, and then in a moment that just absolutely reeks of narcissistic woke entitlement, she demands a promotion specifically to Captain. Let me remind you that Peggy Carter is a member of the British Royal Military, and she is demanding a promotion from an American colonel.
How dumb are you?
I'm not really sure what to say to this except that the writers must be fucking idiots. It's not the same military. There are different rules. Someone from a different military cannot give you a promotion, you moron. It doesn't matter if you're serving together. It doesn't matter if that other person is above you temporarily in whatever organization you're currently assigned to. That's not how it works.
What? No.
Moving forward a little bit, just like in the movie, Peggy breaks into a prison camp and releases the soldiers of the 107th. Once they get outside, Steve Rogers arrives in an Iron Man suit called the Hydra Stomper, built by Howard Stark and powered by the Tesseract. Both he and Peggy destroy the Hydra tanks, followed by a montage of Peggy and Steve going on various missions. Meanwhile, Red Skull has moved on to a new plan. Instead of using the Tesseract to create weapons, now he's going to use it to open a portal that will summon a monster that will serve Hydra and allow him to either control the world or destroy it. Similar to what happened in the movie, Peggy, Steve, and their group attack a Hydra train that was moving through the snowy mountains. However, this time it was specifically set up as a trap to capture Steve and the Tesseract. So instead of Bucky falling off the train, Steve is buried under an avalanche after the train explodes. Everyone believing Steve is dead, they go back to base where Peggy interrogates Zola to get more information about Red Skull's plan and where he might be. Why they didn't do this when he was initially captured, who knows, whatever. Peggy then gives her plan that she wants to do to go and stop Red Skull, and Colonel Flynn says, no wonder Hydra wanted to take out Steve Rogers, because you would need the Hydra Stomper suit to get close to Red Skull's base, to which Peggy replies, Colonel, you're lucky to even be in the room.
The what? The what? And the what?
And this makes absolutely no sense. It's supposed to be some kind of a burn against Colonel Flynn, because several times previously in the episode, he had said that very same phrase to Peggy. However, when he said it, in those contexts, it was an entirely valid remark. But now Peggy is saying it to him because the woke weirdos want to show that she's a strong woman, she can take down the patriarchy, and she's in charge now. But her saying it in this context makes no fucking sense whatsoever. Let me play it for you.
You need the Stomper to get close.
Colonel, you're lucky to even be in the room.
Her response is utterly nonsensical. It has nothing to do with the remark that Colonel Flynn just made.
You're just a woman with a small brain.
But the writers had to ham-fist Peggy's response into this scene because they wanted to have her throw that line back at Colonel Flynn to show the woke weirdos that man bad and woman good. The misandry is glaringly obvious and painfully stupid. Inside the castle, Red Skull is using the Tesseract to open a portal and a giant tentacle monster begins coming through, but suddenly it grabs Red Skull and kills him instantly by crushing him. And I guess this is supposed to be funny, but it just comes across as really dumb. Peggy begins fighting the tentacle monster, but for some reason it's not able to do any significant harm to her, even though it just instantly crushed the Red Skull. Remember, Red Skull had also received a dose of the super serum. The version he got wasn't quite the same as the one that Steve and Peggy got, but it still made him into a super soldier. Red Skull had super strength, super endurance, and all the other stuff that goes along with it. The main difference is that his version caused the physical changes, namely the Red Skull. But despite being able to instantly crush Red Skull, the tentacle monster is incapable of dealing any kind of serious damage to Peggy because reasons. Elsewhere in the castle, Bucky is able to find Steve and get him back into the suit, but it doesn't have much power left because the Tesseract had been removed. Howard Stark then comes up with a plan to get rid of the tentacle monster, and he kind of only vaguely explains it because he says there's lots of sciencey stuff involved. But of course, the show needs to prove that Peggy is super smart, so it has Peggy go into a full scientific explanation, the thing that Howard had just kind of skimmed over because it wasn't necessary to explain. But no, Peggy needs to explain it, because not only does Peggy need to be better in every possible way than Captain America, she also needs to be smarter than Howard Stark. Because fucking of course.
Great job, Morty. A feminist masterpiece.
The plan doesn't quite work as the monster's able to resist, so Peggy needs to physically push the tentacle monster through the portal, which of course she does with absolutely no effort whatsoever. She, along with the tentacle monster, go into the portal, and it closes behind her, and all that's left is the Tesseract. And then the next scene takes place in modern day with Hawkeye and Nick Fury using the Tesseract to create a portal within one of the SHIELD buildings. When the portal is fully activated, Peggy jumps out along with pieces of the tentacle monster, and we see that for Peggy, no amount of time has passed. For her, it was instant. One moment ago, she was inside Red Skull's castle going into the portal, and then the next moment, she's jumping out inside of a S.H.I.E.L.D. building. Nick Fury explains that she is 70 years into the future and that the war is over. I can't begin to stress how mind-numbingly stupid this is. As I stated at the beginning of this video, the Space Stone, which is inside the Tesseract, does not have the ability to let people travel through time. You can only travel through space, going from one location to another, which is why it's called the Space Stone. If you want to travel through time or control time, you need the Time Stone. But for some reason, the writers on this show seem to think that all of the Infinity Stones can do everything, even though they very clearly have specific powers. After everything we saw in WandaVision, Loki, Black Widow, and now this, there's no question that Phase 4 will be the MCU. This show, just like the others, is absolute fucking garbage, and it's only downhill from here. And that's the end of Episode 1.